One Piece chapter 1066, and man oh man, the reveals was crazy in this chapter. This arc is easily on its way to become a classic because Oda hasn't missed yet. We're a couple of chapters deep now, and it just seems to be getting better and better as we progress forward. And I've got to say that this chapter was really packed. Dragon, Vegapunk, Ohara, Dr. Clover, all of these fascinating characters being intertwined was something that I didn't really expect, but seeing everything come full circle here was just honestly amazing. Initially, when we came into this arc, I was thinking that Oda was going to sort of build up on a little things a little bit more than he usually would, but in this arc we're diving right in with the reveals and questions being answered, and that's something that we've always wanted from One Piece, right? So this chapter is massive. It gives you answers as well as perspective as to how some things came to be. And of course, Dragon being one of the more mysterious characters in the series, seeing what we got here with him in this chapter was fire. So I will say that it's a good time to be a One Piece fan right now. But before we keep going, guys, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video. Let's go for 1,000 likes as usual. Hit the bell if you want to get notified for future content, and subscribe if you're new here. Now, first things first, we got to talk about Vegapunk because everything in this chapter is sort of intertwined with him. Now, going off of the previous chapter, we sort of expected that Dragon and Vegapunk had some ties, right? But we weren't sure how deep these ties were. But this chapter answered that these guys go all the way back to about 20 years ago, right? Even before the founding of the Revolutionary Army. And here, as Shaka was talking to Straw Hats, he seems to be very knowledgeable about what happened during the Void Century, as well as the events that took place on the destruction of Ohara. And of course, this ties into the conflict between the alliance between the 20 nations and the Ancient Kingdom, the 20 nations being the world government that we know of today. Now, as to why Vegapunk knows all of this, well, that was because he was there a day after the events of Ohara. And not only that, he seems to have knowledge about the books and the research that the Oharans cultivated. And this goes back to a flashback in which we see Dragon, a younger version of Dragon, and Vegapunk himself, the original Vegapunk. And these two seemingly showed up after the fact, given that they were friends with Dr. Clover. And what's very interesting is that Dragon and Vegapunk seem to know each other way before even this flashback, because it does mention here that Dragon wanted to recruit Vegapunk, and it seems like before this event Dragon actually had an organization called the Freedom Fighters, and it would seem that Dragon was pissed about Vegapunk becoming subordinates to the world government. But Vegapunk does mention here that he chose the world government because they had money to fund his research, and that there is a potential of Marines being a part of this cause in the long run, which could explain organizations within the Marines like Sword. Vegapunk may have played a part into that, but it does seem like Dragon and Vegapunk were in cahoots for quite some time now. It was also mentioned that the reason Dragon formed the Revolutionary Army was because of the events of Ohara. That had a very deep impact on him. So a year after the events, he founded the Revolutionary Army with Ivankov and Kuma. And that's when he actively started going against the world government. And I've got to say, it does seem like Dragon was more hot-headed back in the day, I feel like, because here it seems like he's more wild and not as calm as he is in the current timeline. So maybe back in the Freedom Fighter days, he was more so like Luffy and Garp and how they were when they were younger. So that's something I found really interesting. Now, going back to Robin's flashback, we always wondered what was going to happen to the books that the Oharans dumped into the lake to preserve the history, right? And here we come to find out that giants actually showed up to recover all of those books, specifically giants from Albath. And here it actually confirms that the person or the captain of these people was Soul. So this essentially confirms that Soul did not die, right? Even though they made it seem like Aokiji killed him, Aokiji may have had a soft spot and may have done the same thing he did with Robin and letting Soul go at the end there. They also mentioned that he was covered in burns, so this might be the individual that Kid was talking about. We're not sure entirely. It's looking like the man marked with flames is Jaguar D Soul, and he might be the key to the fourth poneglyph. So Albath now is definitely a point of contention if it wasn't before, because we have a reason to go to Albath now, right? Because before there wasn't really that much we could go off of, but now there's a lot of narrative value to actually go to Albath because everything seems to be pointing there. And talking about Albath, we do also know that Vegapunk actually went to Albath to read all of the books and pretty much uncovered everything Ohara unveiled, right? And of course, Vegapunk being the big brain individual that he is, he was able to memorize every single detail and continue their research for them. And that's sort of the theme of this chapter, in which they talk about Ohara's will still lives on, right? Because in this chapter, we come to see see that the will of Ohara with 3 new individuals: Dragon, Jaguar Soul, and Vegapunk. And so we're seeing the effects of how these events that took place shaped these individuals to become who they are. So it's really interesting to see how Robin's backstory was sort of interconnected with these 2 individuals, right? Dragon and Vegapunk specifically. So I like how Oda is really putting everything together. But this chapter is a massive indication as to whose side Vegapunk is really on, and of course that's our side, right? The Straw Hats, the revolutionary, the good side. Because before this we were sort of doubtful as to where his ideologies lied, but now it's pretty much confirmed that he's going to be against the world government. And Vegapunk, being the individual that he is, he's going to be a very massive powerhouse in taking down the world government because he's very knowledgeable about certain things. And not only that, he also has a force of his own, right, with science. So that's something that's really going to help the Alliance win this supposed war that's coming against the world government. Now, going back to Vegapunk here, he does mention something very interesting in the beginning of the chapter, in which he talks about some sort of machinery that was from the Void Century that was excavated. Now, we don't really get more context as to what it was, but this might actually be something very important moving forward in the story, because it could tie into like the treasure of Maridra, or the world government, or Im-sama having some technology of the ancient kingdom and something that they potentially might be able to use. Who knows? It could be tied to whatever was used on Lelouchia, or it could also be an ancient weapon, because we know that the ancient weapons were created during the Void Century, right? And this makes a lot of sense because we know that the Tweenie nations did defeat the ancient kingdom, so it makes sense that they would have, or at least taken, some of these relics that the ancient kingdom had for themselves. And it also makes you question how the ancient kingdom was defeated in the first place, because now you would think, how did these 20 nations defeat this highly advanced technological country, right? So to me, I'm starting to think that some backstabbing might be at play here, honestly, as to not only how the war started, but how the ancient kingdom were defeated as well. But the first section of this chapter was honestly amazing, because now we're finally getting answers and things getting revealed, and everything's sort of coming full circle now. And that's honestly amazing to see in One Piece, because Oda usually drives these mysteries to the deep end, right? So that was great. Now, at the end of the chapter, we do encounter the real Vegapunk, or at least Luffy encounters him, in which Vegapunk, the real one, says that he's been waiting for Luffy, or that Dragon Son was eventually going to make it here. So it looks like he's been waiting for Luffy for a reason. And it could also tie into Luffy's Devil Fruit. Maybe Vegapunk has some knowledge on the Sun God, so we'll see what happens. But more than likely is he's more so interested because this is Dragon's son, right? So I like where this is leading towards. What's also interesting is that his design seems to be what a lot of people initially expected when it came down to a Vegapunk design. Now, Oda kind of threw us off with the clones, given that Oda is usually prone to subverting of expectations. A lot of people were changing their mindset of him not being an old man, but in this chapter his design seems to be referenced from Einstein, from what it looks like. And what's also very interesting about his character is that his head is massive, right? Especially in the flashback, because it seems like he was gaining knowledge at that point, so his head keeps growing, because Dragon does mention that the last time that he met him, his head was smaller. So this might be a part of whatever race he is, or this could also be a devil fruit ability like the intelligence fruit or the smart fruit or something like that. There's definitely something strange about him. It seems that more than likely the more knowledge that he gains, the bigger his head gets, right? That's what I'm getting from this, because in the current timeline his head is not as big, but we do also know that he has clones now, and maybe his head shrank from giving the knowledge to those clones. And you could sort of see an apple on top of his head, which could sort of signify or be a reference to the apple that Adam ate, the apple of knowledge. So that could be what's been referenced here. But I do think it's more than likely some sort of devil fruit, because I think a lot of people also thought that Vegapunk was a part of some other race. I believe some people thought he was a part of the Longhead race, which is an actual theory, but I'm not sure with this chapter. It seems like there's more to it than it just being a race, right? So we'll see where that goes. But I definitely gotta say that this chapter was amazing in terms of just everything, right? The lore, mystery, reveals. This was a really good chapter, and I feel like Oda has more to show us in the next chapter about other things that we do have questions about, perhaps even relating to devil fruit abilities and how those came to be. So definitely looking forward to that. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video, comment down below what you guys think, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, Hit the bell if you want to get notified for future content on this channel. You can follow me on Twitter at Ferrospace. But it is Pharaoh, and I will see you folks later. Peace.